The first time I heard about Black Hollow Road, I was 6 years old. My grandfather, who smelled like pipe tobacco and old paperbacks, told me about the people who went missing there, whole families who took a wrong turn and never came back. The road eats people, he'd said, tapping the side of his whiskey glass. Or maybe it lets them out somewhere else. Either way, no one comes back the same. At 6, I thought it was just another ghost story. At 34, standing at the edge of that very road with a dying cell phone and a growing sense of unease, I wasn't so sure. The town of Black Hollow barely existed. It was one of those places that time forgot, wedged between nowhere and somewhere you'd never think to go. The kind of town where gas stations still used those outdated pumps with spinning numbers, where the local diner had a hand-painted sign that just read eat, and where everyone knew each other's business but wouldn't say a damn word to an outsider. Which is exactly what I was. I wasn't here for a joyride or some urban legend road trip. I was here because of Emily Carter. She was a college student, a journalism major at Penn State, who went missing on this road 6 months ago. Her last text to her roommates said, "I think I'm lost. This road doesn't end." Then nothing. Her car was found on the roadside 3 days later. No signs of struggle, no blood, no footprints leading away. The keys were still in the ignition, phone on the dashboard, battery dead. Just gone, like she stepped out of reality itself. When the police shrugged and closed the case, her parents hired me. I'm Daniel Hale, investigative journalist. Not the big-time, award-winning kind, but the kind who digs into the stories no one else will touch. Missing people, weird, unsolved cases, towns where things don't quite add up. I run a small blog, Lost and Left Behind, where I document the shit that mainstream media doesn't care about. Emily's case? It was my kind of story, or at least it was supposed to be. Standing at the entrance of Black Hollow Road, staring at the sign that had more bullet holes than actual letters, I started to think I'd made a mistake. The sun was sinking below the trees, stretching the shadows long across the cracked pavement. The road itself was nothing special. Narrow, winding, swallowed up by thick woods on both sides. No streetlights, no houses, no signs of life. Just a single, faded dead end sign half buried in the overgrowth. I pulled out my phone, snapped a few pictures, and tried Google Maps again. No signal. Of course, I'd already been through the town, talking to locals, piecing together what little they'd tell me. Most just muttered the same thing. People get lost out there. A few had darker warnings. You go in, you might not come out. And if you do, you won't be you anymore. Superstitious bullshit. Or at least, that's what I kept telling myself. I took a deep breath and got back into my car. Then I did something incredibly stupid. I started driving. At first, it was just a road. The pavement was cracked, but not terrible. The trees loomed close, their bare branches clawing at the sky like skeletal fingers. The headlights cut a narrow path through the dusk, revealing nothing but more road ahead. I checked the odometer. 5 miles in. That's when I saw the first signpost. I almost missed it. Just an old, rusted metal sign on the right side of the road. It read, "Welcome to Black Hollow," which made no sense. I had just left Black Hollow. A chill crawled up my spine. I kept driving. 10 miles. The road should have ended by now. According to every map, it was only about 6 miles long before looping back toward town. But it just kept going. The trees pressed closer. The road narrowed. My headlights caught glimpses of movement in the woods. Just animals, I told myself. Deer, maybe a fox. Then I saw the figure. It was standing on the side of the road, just outside the reach of my headlights. A tall, thin silhouette, barely distinguishable from the trees. I slowed down, rolled down my window a crack. "Hey!" I called out. My voice sounded small, swallowed by the trees. No response. The figure didn't move, didn't even shift its weight. It just stood there. Something about it was wrong. I couldn't see its face, but my gut screamed at me to keep driving. So I did. 15 miles. I checked my gas gauge. Half a tank. I should have hit the highway by now, or at least some kind of landmark, but it was just more road. The same endless, looping stretch. I swallowed hard, trying to ignore the way my skin was crawling. I needed to turn around, but when I checked my rearview mirror, the road behind me was gone. No headlights, no tire tracks, just blackness stretching forever. My heart pounded. I slammed the brakes, gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I twisted around in my seat, looking over my shoulder. The road had changed. It was no longer the cracked pavement I'd been driving on. Now it was smooth, perfect, no potholes, no marks, like it had never been driven on before. And standing dead center in the road in my headlights was me. I don't remember screaming, but my throat burned. The thing in the road, my exact double, just stood there, hands in its pockets, watching me. Then it smiled, and I swear to God, its teeth were wrong. Too many of them, too sharp. I threw the car into reverse, tires screeching. The figure tilted its head, watching me with an expression that was almost amused. I blinked. It was gone, just vanished, like it had never been there. My breath came in ragged gasps. My hands were slick with sweat on the wheel. I had to get out of here. I drove, fast. The odometer ticked up. 20 miles. 30. The road never changed. I should have been back in town by now. I should have seen something. Anything besides trees and endless pavement. But there was nothing, just more black hollow road. Then my headlights flickered, the engine sputtered, I slammed my foot on the gas, but the car lurched, coughing like something was choking it. The radio crackled, static hissing through the speakers, and then through the static I heard my own voice. "You shouldn't be here, Daniel." The engine died, the headlights went out, and in the darkness, something knocked on my window. The knock came again, soft, almost polite, a gentle tap, tap, tap against the driver's side window. I couldn't move. My hands were locked in a death grip around the steering wheel, my breath frozen in my throat. The car was dead. No engine hum, no headlights, just the suffocating weight of darkness pressing in from all sides. And something was outside. I swallowed hard, forcing my hand to move. Slowly, I reached for my phone, the only light source left. The screen glowed weakly, showing 3% battery. I turned on the flashlight. Tap, tap, tap. I jerked the phone toward the window. Nothing. Just an empty road. The trees beyond were motionless, frozen in eerie stillness. No wind, no movement. The world felt wrong, like a pause video, waiting for someone to hit play. But I wasn't alone. I could feel it. Something was still here. My skin prickled, every nerve screaming at me to go, go, go. But the car was dead. And no matter how many times I turned the key in the ignition, it wouldn't start. Just that awful click, click, click of a useless engine. I took a slow breath. Think hail. I had two options. One, stay in the car. Hope daylight would fix whatever the hell was happening. Two, get out. Neither option felt particularly safe. But then, something moved in the rearview mirror. A dark shape, a figure, sitting in my back seat. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. My stomach clenched. Every hair on my arms standing up. The shape didn't move. It just sat there, watching. A whisper scraped through the car, low, almost thoughtful. "You don't belong here, Daniel." My blood turned to ice. I did the only thing I could. I threw the door open and ran. I hit the pavement hard, my boots skidding against the cracked asphalt. The flashlight from my phone cut a weak path through the dark, barely enough to see where I was going. Behind me, the car sat in eerie silence. The shape in the back seat was gone. I didn't stop running. I didn't stop until I was deep in the trees, lungs burning, heartbeat hammering in my skull. Then I made another mistake. I looked back, and the road was gone. My knees nearly buckled. There was no road, no car, nothing but a dense wall of trees where the pavement had been, like the forest had swallowed it whole. "This isn't happening," I muttered, dragging a shaking hand down my face. This isn't real, but it felt real. The cold air biting at my skin, the damp earth beneath my boots, the dead silence pressing against my eardrums. No wind, no birds, no insects, the kind of silence that felt wrong. I turned in a slow circle, my flashlight beam bouncing off tree trunks and tangled roots. I was alone, except no, not alone, because something was watching me. I could feel it, that awful, gut-deep sensation of eyes crawling over my skin. The beam of my flashlight flickered, and that's when I saw them. Eyes, dozens of them, suspended in the trees like floating orbs, staring at me from the darkness. Not glowing like an animal's reflection, just black, empty pits, holes in the world itself. I staggered back, my pulse slamming in my ears. The eyes didn't blink, didn't move. They just watched. Something shifted in the distance. A slow, deliberate rustling, like something stepping between the trees. Coming closer. My brain screamed at me to run, but my legs wouldn't cooperate. I could only stand there, locked in place, as the shadows between the trees deepened, stretching toward me like ink spilling over the forest floor. The rustling stopped. Silence. Then a whisper. Low. Amused. Almost familiar. "You're already too far in, Daniel." And just like that, the eyes blinked out. The next thing I knew, I was waking up in my car. Daylight poured through the windshield, the pale morning light making my head throb. My hands were still clutched around the steering wheel, my foot pressed hard against the brake, as if I'd never moved, as if none of it had happened, except there were footprints in the dirt outside my window, leading away from the car, and leading back, like someone had stepped out, and then climbed back in. I sat there for a long time, staring at the footprints, my breath coming in short, uneven bursts. No, this wasn't right. I fumbled for my phone. Dead. The car, though, the engine started on the first try, like nothing had happened, like the night had never existed at all. I didn't wait. I threw the car into reverse, tires screeching against the pavement as I whipped the wheel around. My only thought was to get the hell out of here. The road felt different in the daylight. Still desolate, still empty, but no longer suffocating. No longer wrong. I reached town in less than 10 minutes. 10 minutes, even though I had driven for hours the night before. I parked outside the diner, hands shaking as I stumbled out of the car. I needed coffee, answers, something to remind me that reality was still intact. The bell over the door jingled as I stepped inside. The smell of burnt coffee and frying bacon filled the air. A few locals sat at the counter, murmuring over their plates, but their voices cut off the moment they saw me. The waitress behind the counter, Marge, according to her name tag, frowned. "Well, I'll be damned," she muttered, wiping her hands on a dish towel. I frowned. "What?" She exchanged a look with the old man sitting at the counter. Then she leaned forward, lowering her voice. "You sure got back fast." I blinked. "What do you mean?" She gave me a wary look. "You left town 3 days ago, sweetheart." My blood turned to ice. 3 days? My voice came out hoarse. "That's not possible. I just drove out there last night." The old man snorted. "Ain't the first time it's happened." I turned to him, heart hammering. "What the hell is happening on that road?" Marge sighed, rubbing her temple. "Listen, honey, some folks say Black Hollow Road doesn't let go easy. If you go down it, you come back different." I swallowed hard. "Different how?" The old man gave me a long, measured look. Then he slid the diner's wall-mounted mirror toward me. I stared at my own reflection, and I swear to God, for just a split second, it blinked out of sync. My reflection blinked wrong, just for a second. A tiny delay, almost unnoticeable. Almost. I jerked back from the diner's mirror, heart hammering, blood like ice in my veins. My breath came in short, sharp bursts as I stared at my own face, waiting for it to happen again. But it didn't. The mirror showed nothing unusual. Just me, unshaven, dark circles under my eyes, looking like someone who hadn't slept in 3 days. Which, according to Marge and the old man at the counter, was exactly what had happened. But that was impossible. I hadn't been gone 3 days. I'd driven out of Black Hollow Road last night. Hadn't I? I turned to Marge, who was watching me like she was debating whether to pour me another cup of coffee or call a priest. I cleared my throat. "You said 3 days?" She nodded. "Yeah, since I left. Since you drove off toward Black Hollow Road." I tried to process that, but my brain felt like a tangled ball of static. I ran a hand over my face. "Did anyone see me come back?" She shook her head. "No, just walked in like nothing happened." The old man at the counter chuckled darkly. "Least you came back at all." I looked at him sharply. "What's that supposed to mean?" He shrugged. "Some folks don't." The names on the wall. Marge poured me another cup of coffee, her sharp eyes softening just a little. "Listen, honey," she said, her voice low, like she didn't want the other customers to hear. "You're not the first to lose time out there." I wrapped my hands around the coffee mug, letting the warmth ground me. "How often does this happen?" She hesitated, then nodded toward the far end of the diner. "Go look at the wall." I frowned. "What?" "Just go." I slid out of the booth, feeling the weight of every stair in the room. The old linoleum floor creaked under my boots as I crossed to the back wall. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. Dozens, no, hundreds of Polaroid photos, faded, curling at the edges, some black and white, some in washed-out color, pinned up in a loose, chaotic pattern. People, smiling, serious, a few making goofy faces, most of them young, but not all. And underneath each photo, a name and a date. And in some cases, no end date. I swallowed hard. I scanned the wall, searching for a name I knew. And then Emily Carter. Her photo was near the middle. She looked younger than in the pictures her parents had given me. Brighter, smiling, holding up a cheap diner milkshake like she was making a toast. Underneath her photo, written in neat black marker, Emily Carter, March 15th, 2023. No end date. My stomach turned. I spun back to Marge. Why is she on this wall? Marge sighed because she went up Black Hollow Road and never came back. She did come back, I said, voice tight. Her car was found. The old man at the counter shook his head. That don't mean she came back. I stared at him, my pulse roaring in my ears. What the hell does that mean? Marge and the old man exchanged a look. Then she leaned in and said, voice barely above a whisper, you ever hear of a hollow echo? The hollow echoes. I shook my head. Marge glanced at the other customers, the ones who were pointedly not looking at us, like they wanted no part of this conversation. Then she leaned in. Sometimes Black Hollow Road don't let go all the way. Sometimes it sends back an echo. A cold weight settled in my gut. What does that mean? She hesitated. It means sometimes the people who come back ain't really them. My breath hitched. You think Emily was in an echo? Marge shrugged. She came back without any memory of what happened. You ever read her case file? I nodded stiffly. Emily had been unresponsive when she was found, confused, didn't recognize her own parents at first, and a week later, she disappeared again, gone without a trace. She wasn't the first, Marge murmured, and she won't be the last. I swallowed hard, my hands tightening in a fist on the table. Then what the hell happens to the real ones? The ones who never come back? No one answered, because no one knew. The Whispering House, I spent the next 6 hours digging through old records at the town library. What little information I found only made things worse. The disappearances went back over a century. A pattern. Every few years, someone, usually an outsider, went missing near Black Hollow Road. And sometimes a version of them came back. Not quite right. But it wasn't just the disappearances that caught my attention. It was the house. A crumbling Victorian deep in the woods off Black Hollow Road. One that had been abandoned for decades. And the last place some of the missing were ever seen. I shouldn't have gone. I should have taken my car and driven as far from Black Hollow as I could. But something in my gut wouldn't let me leave. So at 11:45 p.m., I found myself hiking through the woods with a flashlight and a sick feeling that I was making a very bad decision. The trees pressed close, branches clawing at the sky. The wind had died down completely, leaving the woods eerily silent. No crickets, no rustling leaves, just nothing. Then in the distance, a shape. The house. It sat at the end of a crooked path, half swallowed by overgrown brush. A decaying, skeletal thing, its windows black and gaping. I swallowed hard. The moment I saw it, a voice in my head whispered, turn around. I stepped closer instead. The door was open. Not broken, not kicked in, just open, like it was waiting. I hesitated on the threshold, shining my flashlight inside. The beam cut through the dust, revealing warped floorboards, peeling wallpaper, the skeletal remains of furniture. A deep, heavy silence filled the space. I stepped inside, and the moment I did, the door slammed shut behind me. The house knows my flashlight flickered. I whirled around, heart hammering, fingers tightening around the flashlight like a lifeline. The door was still there, still closed, but somehow I knew I wasn't alone. The floor creaked, the walls breathed, the shadows shifted at the edges of my vision. And then from somewhere deep inside the house, a voice, soft, almost familiar, whispering my name, Daniel. I did what any sane person would do. I turned the hell around and ran. I hit the door hard, throwing my shoulder into it. It didn't budge. A slow, cold dread slid down my spine. The whispering grew louder. Daniel. I turned, my breath coming in ragged gasps. And at the end of the hallway, in the dark, a figure stood, motionless, watching me. And even though I couldn't see its face, I knew exactly what it was. Me. The thing standing at the end of the hallway was me. I couldn't see its face, not clearly. Shadows clung to it like a second skin, warping the edges, blurring the details. But I knew. The stance, the shape, the way it tilted its head, like it was studying me just as hard as I was studying it. I took a step back. The floor groaned beneath me. The figure didn't move. I tightened my grip on the flashlight, my pulse slamming in my ears. Who the hell are you? It didn't answer, didn't breathe, didn't blink. The air in the house felt wrong. Thick, heavy, pressing against my skin like I was wading through something invisible. The whispering that had led me inside had stopped, but something told me it wasn't gone. It was watching, waiting. The figure took a step forward. I ran. I hit the door hard, slamming my fist against the old wood. The handle rattled, but it wouldn't turn. Locked. My breath came in ragged gasps. I twisted around, flashlight beam bouncing wildly across the decayed walls, the warped floorboards, the empty doorways leading deeper into the house. But the figure was gone. No footprints, no sound, just gone. But I could still feel it, still feel eyes crawling over my skin. I pressed my back against the door, chest rising and falling in sharp, uneven breaths. Think hail. I reached for my pocket, fumbling for my phone. Dead. Of course. I forced myself to move, to search the room. There had to be something, a way out, an open window, anything. Then a sound from upstairs. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, moving toward the staircase. My stomach clenched. I did not want to see whatever was up there. I grabbed the nearest thing I could find, a rusted fireplace poker leaning against the wall, and braced myself. The footsteps reached the landing, paused. Then, in a voice that sounded exactly like mine, Daniel. I didn't stick around to hear what else it had to say. I did the only thing I could. I kicked out the nearest window and climbed through. Glass shattered, slicing into my arm, but I barely felt it. I hit the ground hard, knees scraping against dirt and dead leaves. Pain flared up my side, but I didn't stop moving. I ran through the trees, branches slashing in my arms, my breath coming in sharp gasps. The woods stretched endlessly in every direction. The air was thick, heavy, like the forest itself didn't want me to leave. Somewhere behind me, the house loomed, watching, waiting. I didn't stop running until I saw my car, sitting exactly where I left it, just off the side of Black Hollow Road. I fumbled for the door handle, threw myself inside, and slammed the lock down. My hands were shaking as I jammed the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life. For one brief, glorious second, relief flooded me. Then I looked in the rearview mirror, and I swear to God, I was sitting in the back seat. The figure in the back seat, my reflection, my double, my whatever the hell it was, didn't move, didn't blink, just stared. It was hard to focus on, like my brain didn't want to process it, didn't want to acknowledge that it was really there. I gripped the wheel, my knuckles white. My breathing was too loud in the silence of the car. Get out, I rasped. No response. My reflection in the mirror sat perfectly still. It was me. Same clothes, same face, same tired eyes. But off. The wrong kind of stillness. Like a wax figure pretending to be a person. Slowly, I reached for the door handle. The moment my fingers brushed it, the figure smiled. And I swear to God, its teeth weren't right. Panic seized my chest. I slammed my foot down on the gas. The car lurched forward, tires skidding against gravel before catching traction. The trees blurred past as I tore down Black Hollow Road at 60, 70 miles an hour. The figure didn't move, didn't shift in the seat, didn't react at all, just sat there, grinning. I kept my eyes on the road, refusing to look in the mirror. My breath came in sharp, panicked bursts. You're not real, I muttered under my breath. A soft chuckle from the back seat. Aren't I? My stomach dropped. I squeezed the wheel tighter. You're not me. Another chuckle, amused, like this was all a joke. I never said I was. I risked a glance in the mirror. The passenger seat was empty. The breath left my lungs in a sharp, shuddering gasp. Had it ever been there at all? My head was spinning. My grip on reality was fraying at the edges. I needed to get out of this town. I didn't stop driving until I saw the neon glow of an all-night gas station on the outskirts of town. I pulled into the lot, tires screeching. The moment the car stopped, I shoved the door open and stumbled outside, gulping in the cold night air. Inside the station, the cashier, an older man with tired eyes, looked up from his newspaper. He studied me for a long moment, then said, "You look like you saw a ghost." I laughed, a short, humorless sound. Yeah, I muttered, something like that. I grabbed a bottle of water from the cooler, my hands still shaking. The whole place smelled like stale coffee and motor oil. The cashier kept watching me as I set the bottle on the counter. "You came from the road, didn't you?" he said. My stomach turned. "What makes you say that?" His eyes flicked to the glass doors behind me, to my car. "Because," he said slowly, "you came in here alone." My pulse roared in my ears. "Yeah?" His expression darkened. "Then why are there two shadows by your car?" I didn't turn around. I couldn't. My body locked up, every muscle screaming, "Run, run, run." I could see the shadows in the reflection of the glass doors. Two. One was mine. The other was taller. The cashier swallowed. His voice dropped to a whisper. "So, I think you should leave." My throat was too dry to respond. Slowly, I backed away from the counter. The door slid open as I stepped outside. The cold night air wrapped around me like a warning. I forced myself to turn, and my reflection in the car window turned a split second too late. The world tilted. For one long, awful moment. I couldn't breathe. I wasn't looking at my own reflection anymore. I was looking at it, the thing from the house. It was inside the car again, sitting perfectly still, staring, and then it raised a hand and waved. It waved at me, a slow, deliberate movement, mocking. My breath turned to ice in my lungs. My legs felt locked in place, as if the pavement beneath my feet had turned to tar. The figure inside my car, my double, my echo, my whatever the hell it was, sat perfectly still, except for that casual little wave. I could feel the gas station cashier watching from inside the building, frozen in the same horror I felt crawling up my spine. Then, the thing in the car tilted its head. Not fast, not jerky, just wrong, like a marionette moving on strings. And then it smiled, wide, too wide, like it was made of something that had studied humans but never quite got it right. I turned and ran. I don't know where I was planning to go. The gas station? Back to town? Anywhere, but near that thing. But the moment I moved, the car door opened, and I heard footsteps following. I did not look back. I ran past the gas pumps, past the flickering neon sign, my breath coming in sharp, desperate gasps. The air was too cold, my vision tunneling, my body screaming at me that I was making a mistake, that I should have gotten in the car and driven far, far away. But that wasn't my car anymore. That wasn't me anymore. I made it as far as the edge of the woods before I collapsed against a tree, chest heaving. My hands shook as I braced myself against the bark, my heartbeat hammering in my skull. And then laughter, soft, almost amused, coming from directly behind me. I twisted around so fast I nearly lost my footing. Nothing, just the road, the gas station in the distance, my car sitting there, door still open. But no one was inside. No one was anywhere, but I could still feel it, watching, waiting. I swallowed hard, backing up until I hit the tree again. Then a voice, low and too familiar. "You shouldn't have run, Daniel." My stomach dropped, because the voice came from inside my own head. I squeezed my eyes shut. This wasn't real. This wasn't happening. But the voice kept talking. "We could have made this easy." My hands clenched into fists. "Shut up, but you always have to make things difficult." It wasn't something distant, like a ghost whispering from another realm. It was in my head, like a thought I wasn't thinking. "It's a game now, Daniel." I forced myself to breathe. "What game?" "You know the rules." I didn't, but something deep in my gut did, because suddenly I knew exactly what was happening. I had to beat it. I didn't go back to town. I didn't go back to the gas station. I went to the one place I knew would have answers. It was a rundown thing on the outskirts of Black Hollow, the kind of place with flickering vacancy signs and carpets that smelled like old cigarettes. I checked into the cheapest room, locked the door, and pulled the curtains shut. Then I did something stupid. I stood in front of the mirror, and I waited. At first, nothing happened. I stared at myself, every muscle tight, waiting for my reflection to move wrong. Minutes passed. Then it smiled. I didn't, but my reflection did. And not just a normal smile. A slow, unnatural grin, stretching too wide, the corners of my mouth curling up in a way my face couldn't. I stumbled back. My reflection stayed where it was, grinning. Then it spoke. "You're running out of time, Daniel." I pressed my back against the motel wall, my pulse hammering. "What do you want?" The reflection tilted its head. "You already know the answer." "I don't." "Then listen carefully, because this is your last chance." I didn't move, didn't breathe. There are 3 rules to the game. The light above me flickered. 1. You can't trust your own reflection. My stomach twisted. Great, love that. 2. If you see yourself run. I swallowed hard. And 3. The reflection grinned wider. 3. By the end of the game, only one of us gets to walk away. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it, waiting, smiling. I had to think. I had to get ahead of it. I went back through every missing person case connected to Black Hollow Road. Emily Carter, Matthew Reed, a dozen more. All of them had the same pattern. They drove down the road. They saw something. They lost time. Some of them came back, but not all the way. And every single case had one detail in common. They all saw their double before they disappeared. I stared at my own face in the motel mirror. My real face. Or at least I hoped it was. I had one shot at this. One chance to break the game. Because I knew something my double didn't. Something the others before me had missed. I wasn't going to run. I was going to trap it. I went back to Black Hollow Road just before midnight. The air was thick, electric. The trees whispered without wind. I parked the car and waited. And right on time it arrived. My double, stepping out from the shadows, tilting its head in that unnatural way. Grinning, "You came back." I nodded. "Yeah, are you ready?" I gripped the steering wheel. I am. It smiled wider. Then let's finish the game. The game was simple. It needed me to run, to break, to get lost in my own fear. But I wasn't going to. I wasn't going to let it win. Instead, I reached into my pocket and pulled out the broken mirror I had taken from the motel. For the first time, it hesitated. A flicker of something crossed its face. Something like fear. Because mirrors showed truth. And this thing wasn't real. It lunged. I threw the mirror forward. The second it saw its own reflection, it screamed. A horrible, guttural sound, like static warping through a broken speaker. The world bent, the trees shuddering, the road beneath me twisting like liquid. And then it was gone, vanished, like it had never been there, like the road had swallowed it whole. I stood there for a long time, gasping for breath, waiting, but nothing happened. The game was over. I got back in the car, checked the rear view mirror. For the first time in days, I was alone. I drove, not fast, not slow, just away. The road stretched ahead, endless and empty. My hands were white-knuckled on the wheel, my body still coiled with tension, waiting for something, a shadow, a voice, another wrong reflection, to appear in the rear-view mirror. But nothing did. I was alone. I should have felt relieved, but I didn't, because even as I left Black Hollow Road behind, even as the sky lightened in the distance, I knew this wasn't over. I made it back to town just as the first hints of dawn stretched across the sky. The streetlights flickered, their glow dying as the sun rose. The town was still asleep, still silent, except for the faint hum of my car's engine as I pulled into the parking lot of the motel. I needed proof, something solid, something real. I had my tape recorder, a habit I'd picked up years ago as a journalist. I had left it running in my car the night before, in case anything strange happened while I slept. I grabbed it from the passenger seat with shaking fingers and rewound it to the start. Then I pressed play. The first few minutes were normal. Silence, a few distant sounds, the rustling of trees, the occasional hoot of an owl. Then, at exactly midnight, the static started. At first, it was faint, a soft, rhythmic crackling like radio interference. But the longer I listened, the worse it got. The static grew. Louder, deeper, wrong. Then a whisper, so soft I almost missed it. Daniel. My stomach clenched. The whisper wasn't mine, and it wasn't alone. More voices joined in. Faint, layered, talking over each other in a strange, rhythmic chant. I leaned in, pressing the recorder closer to my ear. My pulse roared in my head. The voices were saying something. A pattern, a phrase, repeated over and over. Who walks away? Who walks away? Who walks away? My skin went cold. The whispering grew faster, more desperate. Who walks away? Who walks away? Who walks away? Then a new voice, a deep, rasping growl that cut through the static like a blade. Not him. The recorder shut off. I sat in stunned silence. The recorder still clutched in my hand. My breath came in uneven gasps. The voices knew. Something new. I wasn't supposed to have left. I wasn't the one who was supposed to walk away. The thought turned my stomach. I shoved the recorder into my jacket pocket and climbed out of the car, my legs shaking beneath me. I needed answers, and there was only one person in this town who might have them. I knocked on the door of room 6 at the motel. At first, there was no response. Then, after a long pause, a voice. Low, gravelly. Go away. I knocked again. I know you've been out there. Silence. Then, footsteps. The door cracked open just enough for me to see one bloodshot eye peering through. The man inside was thin, gaunt, uneven stubble covered his jaw, and his clothes looked like he'd been wearing them for days. I recognized him immediately. Matthew Reed. He was on the wall of missing people in the diner, and according to his date, he had disappeared 20 years ago. You're not real. Matthew didn't open the door all the way, just enough to whisper, "You shouldn't be here." I swallowed hard. Neither should you. His eyes darkened. "I got out," he muttered. "I got out and I'm staying out." I pulled out my recorder. "Then tell me what this means." I pressed play. The whispering started again. "Who walks away? Who walks away?" Matthew flinched. His fingers tightened on the edge of the door. Then, before the tape reached the final, rasping growl, he slammed the door shut. I pounded my fist against the wood. "Tell me what's happening." From the other side, a low, ragged whisper. "You're not real." The words made my stomach twist. What the hell does that mean? Matthew didn't answer, but I heard him locking the door. I sat outside his door for a long time, replaying the tape over and over, trying to make sense of it. Who walks away? I did. Not him. So, who should have? I thought I had beaten the game, that I had won. But what if I was never supposed to leave? What if the thing I saw in my reflection, the thing I ran from, wasn't the imposter? What if it was supposed to take my place? The motel room clock read 11:57 p.m. I was exhausted, frantic, breaking. I stared at my reflection in the motel's bathroom mirror. I looked the same tired eyes, same scruffy face, same cut on my arm from breaking the window at the house. I raised my hand. The reflection raised its hand. At the same time, exactly the same, I let out a slow breath. I was me. I had to be, didn't I? Then, the clock on the nightstand clicked over to midnight, and the lights went out. The room plunged into darkness. I fumbled for my phone, for anything, but before I could move, a whisper. Daniel. A sound behind me. I turned and saw myself, standing in the dark, still, silent, watching. A shudder ran through my spine. I opened my mouth to speak, but it beat me to it. You should have let me go. It stepped closer. I stepped back. The room felt wrong. The air too thick, too heavy. The walls too close. I swallowed hard. What are you? It smiled. The real you. My hands clenched in a fist. You're lying. Am I? It reached into its pocket, pulled something out, and when it held it up to the faint glow of my phone screen, it was my tape recorder. Still running. Still recording. I checked my own pockets. My recorder was gone. Who walks away? A cold horror washed over me. I wasn't holding the recorder, because I wasn't supposed to have it. I took a step forward. So did it. I reached out. So did it. Our fingers touched, and in that moment, the whispering returned. Who walks away? Who walks away? I gasped, and everything went black. Morning comes to Black Hollow when I woke up. The motel room was silent. The lights were back on. The clock reads 7 a.m. I sat up, my heart racing. Then, slowly, I turned toward the mirror. I looked the same tired eyes, same scruffy face. But I felt different, lighter, like something had been left behind, or something had been set free. I checked my pocket. The tape recorder was still there. I pressed play. Silence. Then, who walks away? I did, didn't I? I sat on the edge of the motel bed, staring at the tape recorder in my hand. The room was quiet, normal, like nothing had happened, but something had. Something was still wrong. I pressed play. The tape word. Silence. Then, who walks away? A slow, rhythmic whisper. Who walks away? Who walks away? I swallowed hard. My throat felt like sandpaper. And then, a voice that made my blood turn to ice. Not him. The same last words I'd heard on the previous recording. Only now. It sounded like me. The wrong Daniel. I put the tape recorder down like it had burned me. My pulse hammered in my ears. Not him. What did that mean? Who the hell was it talking about? I shoved a shaking hand through my hair. My whole body felt wrong, like I was a second out of sync with reality, like my thoughts were an echo of someone else's. I pushed myself off the bed and stumbled into the motel bathroom, turned on the light, and looked in the mirror. My reflection stared back, tired, unshaven, the cut on my arm still raw. I lifted my hand. My reflection did the same, perfectly synchronized. I was me, wasn't I? I needed to be sure. I pulled out my phone. No signal. Not surprising. But when I checked the date, my stomach twisted. 3 more days had passed. I stumbled back against the sink. My heartbeat slammed against my ribs. No, I had just gone to sleep, hadn't I? Testing reality, I needed to know if I was real, if I was still me. I grabbed my tape recorder, set it on the motel table, and hit record. I cleared my throat. My name is Daniel Hale. My voice sounded normal. A little shaky, but normal. I forced myself to keep going. It's been, I don't know how many days since I went to Black Hollow Road. I don't know if I ever really left, but I feel different, off. I need to be sure I'm still real. I hit stop, took a deep breath, then pressed play. For a second, everything was fine. Then, at the very end of the recording, my own voice whispered, "You're not." The town's reaction, I was out of the motel and driving toward town before I fully processed what I was doing. I needed confirmation, someone to look me in the eye and tell me I was still me. But when I stepped into the diner, the entire place went silent. The waitress, Marge, stared at me like she was seeing a ghost. The old man at the counter dropped his fork. No one spoke. I swallowed hard. Morning. Marge didn't move. You were gone. I frowned. Yeah, a couple of days, I guess. Her face paled. A couple. I licked my lips. How long was I gone? No one answered. The old man stood up so fast his stool scraped against the floor. Then he muttered under his breath, "It ain't him." And just like that, The entire diner emptied. The stranger in my house, I had one last test. One last way to know for sure if I was the real me. I was going home. My house was a small one-story rental on the edge of town. Nothing special. A place I never stayed in for long, since my job kept me moving. I pulled into the driveway, my hands slick with sweat on the wheel. My chest felt tight. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was about to see something I didn't want to see. I stepped out of the car. The air was too still. The whole neighborhood felt wrong, like a paused video. I reached the front door. My hand hovered over the doorknob. Then I heard movement inside. Someone was in my house. I pulled the door open and froze, because sitting on my couch, flipping through my notebook, drinking a beer like he lived there, was me. Two Daniels I didn't breathe, didn't move. The other Daniel, my double, my replacement, my hollow echo, barely looked up. He just sighed and took another sip of my beer. Well, he muttered, "This is awkward." I didn't respond. Couldn't. My throat had closed up. My hands clenched in a fist at my sides. The other me tilted his head, studying me with something like amusement. "Took you long enough to show up." My voice finally returned, hoarse and shaky. "Who the hell are you?" The thing in my skin smirked. "Same as you." I swallowed hard. "That's not possible." He shrugged. "Sure it is." He tapped his temple. "We both walked away, didn't we?" I shook my head. No, I want. The other me leaned forward and whispered, "Are you sure?" The final question, my breath hitched, because suddenly I wasn't. Sure, I had beaten the thing on the road. Sure, I had survived, but what if that was part of the game? What if it had tricked me into thinking I won, because I was the one who was supposed to stay? The other me stood up, and for the first time I noticed the difference. He was more solid than I was. More real, like the world recognized him. I was the ghost, the echo, and we both knew it. His smirk softened into something almost sympathetic. "You know what happens next, right?" I did, but I didn't want to believe it. The last fight, I lunged. Maybe out of desperation. Maybe out of sheer, blind rage. But the second I grabbed him, I felt it. He was warm, solid. I was cold, weightless. I wasn't real. I never had been. And as I stumbled back, realization crashing over me like a tidal wave, the other Daniel exhaled and whispered goodbye. And just like that, I disappeared. The hollow echo remains the real Daniel Hale, the one who walked away, stood alone in his living room. The house was quiet again. Empty. The echo was gone. Black Hollow Road had taken back what it was owed. And Daniel Hale was whole again, wasn't he? Daniel Hale was home. He had won. He had walked away. He had beaten the game, hadn't he? The house felt normal again. The air didn't hum with that wrongness. The shadows didn't stretch in unnatural ways. And when Daniel stood in front of the mirror, his reflection followed his every move, exactly as it should. No delay, no extra wide grin, no hollow echo staring back at him. He was whole. He was real. At least, that's what he kept telling himself. At first, everything was fine. Daniel took a long, scalding shower, letting the heat soak into his bones. He made himself a cup of coffee, extra strong, and drank it black just like always. Just like always. It was a good day. A normal day. Except, something itched, not on his skin, but underneath it. A slow, creeping unease, a whisper in the back of his skull that wouldn't go away. Something was off. Something was wrong. He just couldn't figure out what. Familiar. Yet off the first thing he noticed was the notebook. It sat on his desk, exactly where he had left it. He opened it, flipping through pages of messy, scrawled notes about Black Hollow Road. His own handwriting, his own words, but some of them weren't. Some sentences weren't his at all. They were slightly different. Wrong, where he had written, Emily Carter disappeared on March 15th. The words now read, Emily Carter was erased on March 15th. His breath hitched. He flipped the page. His own notes had changed, like something else had written them, or like he had written them, but not the same him. He took a sip. It was hot, bitter, perfect. He had been drinking his coffee black for years. So why did it suddenly taste wrong? Like something was missing, like his body expected sugar or cream, something he had never put in his coffee before. His stomach twisted. No, he had always taken it black, hadn't he? And then there was the car. His old, beaten-up sedan sat in the driveway, exactly where he had parked it. But when he slid into the driver's seat and adjusted the mirrors, something inside him screamed. Because this wasn't his car. It was identical. The same scratches on the dashboard, the same stain on the passenger seat. But the air freshener hanging from the rearview mirror? He had never owned one like that. A tiny pine tree. Fresh scent. His heart slammed against his ribs. His head spun. This wasn't his car, was it? His hands trembled as he reached for the glove compartment, pulled it open, and there, folded neatly, was a piece of paper. He unfolded it with stiff fingers. 3 words scrawled in his own handwriting. "You got out." Daniel's breath hitched. The words blurred. The edges of reality wavered. The whispering in his skull grew louder. "Who walks away?" His own voice echoing in his head. "Who walks away? Who walks away?" He clenched his jaw. "I did." But the whispering laughed. One last drive, he had to go back. He had to be sure. His hands were ice cold on the steering wheel as he pulled onto the road. The town blurred past, its empty streets washed in the gray light of late afternoon. And then Black Hollow Road loomed ahead, waiting for him. He took a slow breath and turned onto it. And the moment he did, the sky darkened. The trees swallowed the road, thick and endless. The pavement cracked and splintered beneath his tires. The dead-end sign he had seen before was gone. Like the road had never ended at all. His hands gripped the wheel, so tight his knuckles turned white. The itch beneath his skin worsened. The whispering in his skull grew into a roar. "Not you, not you, not you." The words tangled together, overlapping, voices stacking on top of each other, until suddenly the road changed. And he saw himself. The figure stood in the middle of the road. Another him, but this time it wasn't smiling. It looked furious. Daniel slammed on the brakes. The car screeched to a halt. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then, the figure pointed at him, and its mouth moved, shaping 3 words. "You don't belong." Daniel's hands shook. "I won," he whispered. "I walked away. I got out." The figure stepped closer. It shook its head. Then, in his own voice, it whispered, "No, I did." Daniel's breath caught. The world tilted. The memories in his mind shifted. The night he had left Black Hollow Road. Had he really won? Had he truly escaped? Or had the real him walked away and left something else behind? His stomach lurched. His heartbeat slammed against his ribs. Because he knew the truth. The thing standing in front of his car, that was the real Daniel Hale. The one who had won. And he was just an echo, a hollow copy, a mistake, a thing that was never supposed to walk away. The real Daniel took another step forward. His expression was cold, like he was looking at a thing that shouldn't exist. The echo swallowed hard. "What happens now?" The real Daniel exhaled. "You know." The whispering returned, a chorus of voices. "Who walks away? Who walks away?" "Not you." Daniel's hands clenched on the wheel. Then, slowly, he took his foot off the brake and pressed it to the gas. Impact, the car surged forward. The real Daniel didn't move, didn't flinch, and the moment the car hit him, the world split apart. The trees bent. The sky shattered like glass. A howling void opened around him, stretching endlessly. And Daniel fell. Morning on Black Hollow Road, the sun rose over Black Hollow. A warm, golden light. Daniel Hale sat in his car, hands resting on the wheel. Alone. Whole. The road was empty. No echoes. No whispers. Just him. He let out a slow, shaky breath. Checked the rear-view mirror. His reflection was normal. Finally, he drove away. And this time, Black Hollow Road let him go. The road let him go. Daniel Hale drove. The sun was rising, burning away the last clinging shadows of night. The town of Black Hollow shrank in his rearview mirror. His hands were steady on the wheel. His reflection followed his movements perfectly. He was real. He had won, hadn't he? The uneasy silence, the whispering was gone. That should have been a relief, but instead it felt wrong. The voices that had haunted his mind for days, the ones that had murmured from the trees, hissed through his tape recorder, crawled into his dreams, were silent. Black Hollow Road was done with him. And yet, that it remained. The feeling that something inside him wasn't quite settled. That something still wasn't right. He gritted his teeth. Ignore it. He had gotten out. That was all that mattered. He had walked away. 2 hours outside of Black Hollow, he stopped for gas at a rundown station. The kind of place with flickering lights, an old register, and a radio playing a local news station nobody really listened to. Daniel grabbed a bottle of water, rubbing the tension from the back of his neck as the cashier rang him up. That's when he heard it. And in local news, the body of Daniel Hale was discovered early this morning, abandoned on the side of Black Hollow Road. His stomach dropped. The radio crackled. The voice droned on. Hale, an investigative journalist, had been looking into the disappearances surrounding the area. Authorities are unsure how long his body had been there. Daniel's grip tightened on the water bottle. No, that wasn't possible. He was Daniel Hale. He was standing right here, alive and breathing. Wasn't he? His breath came fast and shallow. He turned, pulse hammering, scanning the gas station for a mirror. There, behind the counter, a cheap security mirror, reflecting the entire store. He forced himself to look. There he was, same tired eyes, same face. But then, the reflection of the cashier turned away from the counter, and Daniel's didn't. It kept staring right at him. A slow, sick grin spread across its face. And then it winked. Daniel staggered back. The bottle of water slipped from his fingers, bursting open against the linoleum. The cashier glanced up. "You good, man?" Daniel's mouth was dry. He could barely find his voice. "Yeah," he croaked. "Just tired." He grabbed his things and left, moving too fast, the bell over the door jangling violently as he shoved outside. The air felt too thin, the world too still. He climbed into his car, gripping the wheel, trying to steady himself. He wasn't dead. He wasn't. But then why had his reflection moved on its own? Why had it winked at him? And why, when he checked his rearview mirror, did his reflection still have that awful, knowing grin? Daniel drove, not toward home, back, toward Black Hollow Road, because there was only one way to be sure. The road had taken something from him, and now it was time to take it back. He reached the edge of the woods just after dark. The sky was heavy, bruised with storm clouds, the wind howling through the trees like a living thing. Daniel climbed out of the car, leaving the door open. The headlights cut long, eerie shadows across the cracked pavement. He took a step forward, and his shadow didn't follow. It stood there, frozen, still stretched behind him in the headlights. Then slowly, it lifted one hand and waved. His breath caught. "No," he whispered. "No, no, no." The shadow stepped forward, and it wasn't a shadow anymore. It was him, the real Daniel Hale, the one who had died, the one who should have walked away, the one he had stolen a life from. Daniel stumbled back. I want. The other Daniel tilted his head. "Did you?" The wind screamed through the trees. The air thickened with something unseen, pressing against Daniel's skin like the weight of a nightmare. The other Daniel stepped closer. "You know why you came back?" Daniel shook his head. I don't." "Yes, you do." It smiled. "You know what has to happen." Daniel clenched his fists. "I won't go back." The other Daniel's smile widened. "You don't have a choice." Daniel's pulse roared. His mind raced. There had to be another way, another trick. But Black Hollow Road didn't work like that. It never had. It was always a game. And in the end, there could only be one winner. The other Daniel stepped forward. Daniel took a sharp breath. His hands shook. And then he ran straight for his car, straight for the only escape he had left. He hit the gas. The tires screeched, kicking up gravel. The headlights sliced through the night as he tore down the road. And in his rearview mirror, the other Daniel chased him. Its movements were wrong, glitching, stuttering, and its grin never faltered. Daniel's heart slammed against his ribs. He knew how this ended. He knew what he had to do. The road twisted ahead, the same bend where it had all begun. And just before he reached it, he slammed the brakes. The car skidded sideways, tires screaming, momentum twisting, and then the other Daniel lunged. For a moment, time froze. The world went silent. Daniel and his double met, colliding with impossible force. And then everything shattered. The car, the road, the sky itself. All of it crumbled like a collapsing dream. Daniel screamed, and then there was nothing. Daniel woke up, lying in the middle of the road, alone. The wind had died. The storm clouds were gone. The night was calm. He sat up slowly. His body ached, but he was whole, real. He looked around. The other Daniel was gone. And for the first time, so was his head. The whispering was gone. The voices were gone. And Daniel Hale was real again. He stood, took a breath. Then, without looking back, he walked away. And this time, Black Hollow Road let him go. Daniel Hale walked away. He didn't run, didn't look back. Black Hollow Road was silent behind him, watching, waiting, but it let him go. Because he had made his choice. Because the game was over, wasn't it? He didn't drive home. He drove to the diner. It was nearly sunrise, the first pale streaks of daylight creeping over the horizon. The neon eat sign buzzed faintly, casting flickering red light across the parking lot. Daniel parked his car, taking a slow, measured breath. It was over. It had to be. He stepped inside, and every conversation in the diner died. Marge, the waitress, froze mid-pour, coffee sloshing over the edge of a ceramic mug. The old man at the counter stiffened, fork halfway to his mouth. Every pair of eyes in the diner turned to him, wide, horrified, like they were seeing a ghost. Daniel swallowed hard. Morning. No one spoke. Marge set the coffee pot down with shaking hands. You shouldn't be here. Daniel frowned. Why? The old man at the counter muttered something under his breath. Daniel stepped closer. "What did you say?" The old man turned, his face pale as bone, and in a trembling voice, he whispered, "You were already here." To Daniel's, the world tilted. Daniel's breath hitched. "What?" Marge took a step back, her fingers clutching the counter. "You came in last night." Daniel shook his head. "That's not possible. I was on the road." The door to the diner opened. The bell jangled, and Daniel's blood turned to ice. Because the man who stepped inside was him. Same tired eyes, same bruised knuckles, same... The diner fell silent. The other Daniel didn't hesitate, didn't speak. He just walked calmly to the counter, slid into an open stool, and nodded at Marge. "Coffee. Black." Marge stared, shaking, but she didn't refuse. She poured the coffee, her hands trembling so badly that the cup nearly overflowed. Daniel's mouth was dry. He turned to the other him, his double, his echo, the Daniel that was supposed to be gone, the Daniel that was supposed to be dead. The other him took a sip of coffee and smiled. Daniel backed away, nearly knocking over a chair. His head spun. No, this wasn't happening. The road had taken him. It had taken the wrong version, hadn't it? His hands shook as he turned toward the nearest mirror, a cheap wall-mounted thing near the coffee station. And when he looked, both versions of him were reflected there, staring back, both real, both solid, and neither of them blinked. Daniel's pulse roared. The other Daniel turned. Their eyes met, and in his own voice, chairs scraped against the floor. The old man stood up, ran. The rest of the customers followed, stumbling over themselves to get to the door. Even Marge was backing away. Her lips moved, murmuring something over and over again under her breath. A prayer? A plea? Daniel didn't know, didn't care. He turned back to himself. The other Daniel. Or was it him? Who was who? Who had walked away? Daniel's throat felt tight. I left you behind. The other Daniel smirked. Did you? You weren't real. The smirk widened. Funny, I was about to say the same thing to you. Daniel swallowed hard. I don't understand. The other Daniel took another sip of coffee, completely calm. You ever think maybe the road didn't want just one of us? Daniel stared. Maybe it wanted both. For the first time since leaving Black Hollow Road, the whispering returned. Soft, faint, but growing. Who walks away? Daniel clenched his jaw. Who walks away? His own voice, his own question. Not him. His hands curled into fists. No. He turned to the other Daniel. We can't both exist. The other Daniel grinned. Guess we'll find out. And then, in perfect sync, they both reached for the knife on the diner table. Marge screamed. The world exploded into chaos. Daniel lunged, so did his double. The blade slashed. The air shattered. And as the whispering grew to a deafening roar, Black Hollow Road finally took what it was owed. One Daniel remains. The diner was quiet. The storm had passed. Marge clutched the counter, her breathing ragged. And when she finally looked up, only one Daniel was standing. Whole, real, breathing. His hands trembled. His knuckles were bloody. The knife sat abandoned on the floor, and the body at his feet had already begun to fade. Daniel Hale staggered back, chest rising and falling. His double was gone, erased. The road had made its choice. Or maybe he had. It didn't matter anymore, because Daniel Hale was finally, truly alone. He looked at Marge. Her eyes were hollow. His voice cracked. Did I win? Marge swallowed hard. Then, slowly, she shook her head. No, she whispered. You just lasted longer than the others. Daniel left town that night. He didn't pack, didn't say goodbye. He just drove, away from Black Hollow, away from the whispers, away from the road that had tried to take him. And in his rearview mirror, there was nothing. No echoes, no doppelgangers, just him. And for now, that was enough. But some roads never end somewhere, deep in the woods. Black Hollow Road still waited. It would be patient. It always was, because someone someday would take a wrong turn, would follow the whispers, would make a choice, and the road would claim another, just like it always did, just like it always would.